Again, I'll begin. Welcome everybody for joining us with our Platica with Dr. Eddy Alvarez. And to get us going, what I would like to do is to start off with the land acknowledgement to begin our talk. With great respect, the Department of Chicana, Chicano, Latina, Latino Studies acknowledges the Tongva people as the traditional caretakers of Tongva Var. The Tongva world, including the Los Angeles Basin, South Channel Islands, San Gabriel, and Pomona Valleys, and portions of Orange County, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. Cal State LA is located within these lands. As an institution located on unceded Tongva land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and our relatives' relations, past, present, and emerging. Consistent with our values of community, we recognize the importance and responsibility to acknowledge and to make visible the university's relationship to Native and Indigenous peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Cal State LA more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous people. And I just want to mention to you that I would like to thank my colega, Kimberly Robertson, who is a professor in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and especially the late Tongva elder, Miss Julia Bogani, who co-wrote this acknowledgement for our Cal State LA community. I ask you to join me in celebrating the life of Miss Julia Bogani by showing her some love, by throwing some hearts on your Zoom screen. May she rest in power. Again, we are excited to host Dr. Alvarez, Eddy, because of his incredible work with documenting the lived experiences of queer, trans, Chicana X, and Latinx communities in Los Angeles, and his mission to educate students and women, immigrants, queers, trans communities about the importance of archiving our local and national Latinx, Chicana X stories. His work demonstrates how we can provide students, women, immigrant, and queer and trans communities with historical materials that can function as a source of inspiration and new scholarship, teaching, and cultural production about our Chicana X and Latinx communities. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And I just want to remind everybody that as we are listening to Dr. Alvarez's presentation, I just want to share a little bit of community guidelines, our Zoom guidelines. I just want to ask everybody to please stay muted when you join while he's doing his presentation, to be aware of your video and audio settings, to raise your hand in the chat to be called on when we enter the question and answer section, and also to feel free to use your Zoom reactions, your emojis, your claps, throw up your hearts, your thumbs up. If you like something that you hear, something that you agree with, let's appreciate each other today. And let's enjoy our time with Dr. Alvarez. Sounds good? Thumbs up, todos? Gracias. So again, I just want to remind everybody that we'll be doing the question and answer section at the end of Dr. Alvarez's talk. And so first, I want to go ahead and introduce our guest of honor. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Eddy Alvarez, who is a first-generation college student and a former elementary school teacher. He is an interdisciplinary scholar who obtained his BA and his MA at Cal State Northridge. He majored in Spanish. He also got his MA and his PhD in Chicano Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. His research interests include Chicana X, Latinx aesthetics, performance and popular culture, gender and sexuality, queer oral histories, Los Angeles queer Latinx histories, queer of color theories, Joteria studies, Joteria pedagogies, queer space, feminist geographies, sound studies, and critical fat studies. What else, Eddy? What else? I said todo. His academic and creative work has been published in Aslan, a journal of Chicano studies, Revista Bilingüe, Bilingual Review, TSQ, Transgender Studies, the Journal of Lesbian Studies, and Sounding Out, the Sound Studies blog. Currently, he's working on a book manuscript titled Finding Sequence in the Rubble, Memory, Space, and Aesthetics in Queer Latinx Los Angeles, an oral history and archive project which maps physical and ephemeral sites of memory and quotidian moments of pleasure and resistance for queer and trans Chicana X and Latinx communities in Los Angeles. He is currently working on a book of essays and poems about growing up queer and Cubano and in a Mexican family in San Fernando Valley. And also he has many other accomplishments. He is also a founding member of AJAS, Association for Joteria, Arts, Activism, and Scholarship. And not only is he our Orgullo Hispano, but he is also a 2020 faculty member, fellow for the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education, and a LGBTQ Latinx organization named him one of the top 41 like LGBTQ Latinx role models. So please join me in giving some love to our presenter, guest speaker, Dr. Eddy Alvarez.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. Thank you so much for that.
I'm playing your song to come up to the stage.
A ver. I can't hear it. Love it. Thank you so much. Awesome. You can hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you so much again to Profe Rafa and Anita and to all of you for having me. It's such an honor. Such an honor to hear a welcome like that. Um, you know, hearing all of it, just, you know, for someone who almost didn't graduate high school, you know, like when I hear that roll call of accomplishments, you know, it really is touching. And I also want to honor the land that I'm on, also Tongva and Kizh, Kizh. I'm in Fullerton, California right now. And so I also want us to think about what it means for most of us to be on stolen land that is not ours, and what it means to benefit from settler colonialism, right? So just to add on to what your professor said. So I'm going to share my screen in a second. I have capabilities for that. Yeah, okay. Let me make sure my timer. Okay. I'm going to share my screen in a second. I will say, to be transparent, I always get really nervous when I do these platicas, even though everyone is, you know, there's no reason to be, really, because everyone's always so kind and warm. And it's really heartwarming, but I do, especially because Zoom takes us into another dimension, you know, of unknown. So me pongo nervioso, pero I know it's going to be cool. I also want us to think, also, the fact that I can't see you all while I'm presenting makes me a little anxious, you know, for those of you that have presented on Zoom, or, you know, so in the classroom, there's always that energy, right, of like being able to see everyone's expressions, but I know that you're there, you know. And the other thing is that as I present, as I talk with you all, I want you to think about every memory, every idea, every image I show is a sequin, right? See how I'm holding this sequined thread here, right? Um, and here, this one is like loose sequins. It's a little bag of loose sequins, right? So I have sequins that are threaded, and I have sequins that are loose, right? And when I in some of the writings I've done, I talk about the methodology, right? If you read my TSQ piece, I talk about stitching together an archive, right? Stitching sequins and the fabric of our lives of queer, trans Los Angeles, immigrant Los Angeles is this fabric that I'm, you know, together with you all stitching together, right? And so I always bring visuals, right, to my presentations. And if we were in person, I would give you sequins and pass them out in the classroom. So imagine that I'm giving you some, right? So remember, everything I share is one lentejuela, and we're stitching it together, okay? I don't actually know how to sew, which is the ironic thing of it all, but I know a lot of people that do. All right, voy a compartir my screen here. Mm, slideshow from start. All right, can you see that? Can you see my screen? Yes, okay. All right, so I titled my presentation today, Finding Sequins in the Rubble, Oral Histories and Archives of Joteria in Los Angeles. I'm giving myself about 10 minutes or so per section, but we'll see how that goes, right? I'll if I have to hurry through some parts, I will. All right. Um, so my goals for today are to talk about my journey to the research, how I got to do this work, right? Like, how did I become a Joteria studies scholar? How did I engage these ideas? I'm also going to talk about my overall project, even before that article that you read for the class. Like, what is the bigger project, right? And then I'm going to talk about the Journal of Lesbian Studies article specifically. Um, Not too in depth because a lot of you read it, and I want to, I want this to be a little interactive too. So if folks, when we get to that part, want to share a little bit about their reactions to the piece, I would love that. But okay, so it's not just me talking, but like, let me hear from you midway through the presentation, right? Like, what are things that you think are important? Because I can tell you what I think is important, but what did you get out of it? And then the last thing are reflections and future directions for the work. As I was preparing for this presentation, I have done a lot of reflecting and thinking about my research and its importance, relevance, and also during the pandemic too, right? Like, some things have been um, accessible to do during the pandemic in terms of research and scholarly work, and others have not been, right? So I have a lot of thoughts. I'm not going to share them all today, but I do have some kind of reflections, and I want to share with you a little bit about the future directions of what are some other ways besides this article that I'm sharing this work and that I plan to share this work, right? Because academic articles are not the only way to disseminate this knowledge, right? So one, the Jotex journey, right? For those of you that you may not know, Jotex is a play, right? An inclusive way of using the X of Joto or Jota, right? Which is a reclamation of the word that can be derogatory to many, right? That many of us in Joteria studies have used. And Gloria Ansaldúa, asked us, in Borderlands, she said, hey, listen to what your Joteria is saying, right? So we've been sort of using this word as a form of empowerment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my baby Jotec self to the present, right? And not a lot, just a few key points, key moments in that journey that have shaped who I am, not just as a scholar, right, but as a person, as a hermano, as an activist, right, as a lover, as I can't disconnect who I am as a scholar from all the other parts of who I am, right? So those are all very integral. And I'm in Chicanx Latinx studies, and I'm in a space that allows me to do that, right? And that validates for the most part that process. So a few pivotal moments. I have my little like Jeopardy looking thing here. A few pivotal moments and people in my academic journey. My queer childhood. I'm gonna pick a few of these to then focus on. So my queer childhood. Dr. Horacio Roque Ramirez, who was one of my advisors in graduate school. Arena nightclub in the 1990s, which I have written about, um, and I can talk more about later. NACS, the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies. AJAS, the Association for Joteria Arts, Activism, and Scholarship. Bambi Salcedo, who some of you may know, is an alum from your department and your campus and is a good friend of mine and we used to work together when I first met her, and have collaborated together, and has been so integral to my thought process and the work that I do. And then the marchas, the immigrant rights marchas or May Day marches of 2005, 2006, 2007, but a couple of the other ones too. So these are, there's so many other moments, right? How do I encapsulate all the moments that have shaped my intellectual journey? But these are just a few that I think are important because they speak to the different aspects of who I am, right? Let's see. So the first one is my Jotex childhood. This is me as a kid, um, when I was, I don't know, like maybe 4, 5, 6, right? And then my sister, Gabby, is there, pretending to be calling someone, and you can see I was already, into fashion back then, and with the '70s looking outfit. I texted my sisters and I said, can you send me the gayest pictures of me when I was a kid? If you have them. So anyway, I was kind of joking around, but they were like, well, yeah, here, these are the pictures. Anyway, why do I share these pictures? Because the more that I excavate into thinking about queer and trans Latinx Los Angeles and Joteria in the city, I think about my own childhood and how my life has been relationally connected to the stories of so many others, right? And how I've carried some of these stories with me since my childhood, right? My ways of knowing, from being asked on the playground, what are you? Are you a boy or a girl? Right? Like dehumanizing me on the playground and bullying me, to my mom supporting my excitement about doing fashion designs, to writing stories and winning the young authors program contest in LA Unified, right, for a couple of years. So my this is part of, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about autohistoria teoria, but like, I my own trajectory as a Jotex kid, right, and the ways that I've come to understand myself are integral to who I am now, right? And I've had to heal. I've had to heal from traumas. I've had to rediscover who I am. I've had to invoke that inner child, right? So much of, like, I feel like the sequins and the stickers that I love and so many things are me sort of healing the traumas that I had experienced as a child, also growing up in a family with, mental health. My father was schizophrenic, right? So there's lots of, childhood, my like parts of the archive of my childhood that I'm trying to connect with the work that I'm doing in telling other people's stories too, right? Another important point in my trajectory is Kathy's Boutique. I don't know if any of you have been there, but Kathy's Boutique is a thrift store in North Hollywood. I was raised in North Hollywood in the San Fernando Valley. And Kathy's Boutique is a vintage shop owned by these two amazing queer mujeres right here, who are a couple. Um, uh, Kathy and Ernestine were the first queer lesbian couple that I met that, you know, um, yeah, that were out and that were loving each other and that were, welcoming me. I was a teenager. I would walk to from my high school home and stop at the vintage shop, and it was filled with sequins and filled with all this jewelry and filled with costuming and all kinds of queer people from the movies and from the industry, and just youth, and this was like the era of like club kids, and so people were looking for outfits in there y todo, right? So Kathy and Ernestine have such an important part in my own trajectory, right? In terms of like the spaces, because I mapped spaces and also like oral histories, right, of people's stories. And so this shop, which has survived gentrification, right? Because that whole area in North Hollywood has been gentrified and they've been able to stay afloat, right? And I'm actually going to be interviewing them soon for my project as well. They're not Latinx per se, but they are part of, the interconnectedness of queer folks of color in LA, right? And that relationality that I'm talking about, right? I also want to honor, and I'm going to try to do this without getting emotional, but Dr. Horacio Roque Ramirez was my professor at UC Santa Barbara. He was one of the, you know, leading scholars in queer Latino studies, queer Central American studies, and we owe so much to him. Recently, I was talking to my friend Francisco Galarte, who I know, you know, you all have spoke with him recently, and we're talking about the way that Horacio's work has been so important in trans Latina studies, right? Because he was always, you know, centering the lives of trans Latinas in his research. And you know, unfortunately, Dr. Ramirez passed away in 2015, but I did get to work with him, and I took an oral history class with him. I still remember sitting at UC Santa Barbara by the coffee shop in the subway there on campus, and him saying like, he's like, you're the one that's gonna do this project on queer Latino LA. I'm doing San Francisco. You got to do LA. You know, as if only two of us could do it, right? But like at that time, right? Like, um, this is around like 2006, 2007 when I had started graduate school. So my work, for me, I owe so much to Dr. Ramirez, and I always keep him very present. I always think of his voice as I'm doing the work, him asking me the critical questions. How is this important to telling the stories, right, of our comunidades? So it's a huge responsibility. It's like I know I have to do some healing there about that, right? But it's definitely like he's always there, present for me. In 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 um in me moving forward and doing the work. So the other really important part of my journey has been the Association for Joteria Arts Activism and Scholarship, AHAS, which some of your professores and some of you may be a part of also. And I know that Knox was also really important, and we sort of like branched out of Knox, right? When I was the chair of the Jota caucus of Knox, but AHAS, organizing with AHAS and organizing these conferences and being in community and, you know, centering the interconnectedness of arts and activism and scholarship has been really critical to my own healing, but also the kinds of questions that I ask in terms of the archives, in terms of the stories that we're telling, in terms of you know, centering this connectedness, right? That I've been thinking a lot about. So um, and I was able to explore a lot of ideas, like many other Joteria study scholars. I've been able to explore ideas by presenting at the conferences, right? And in the conference itself, the concept of each of the conferences, right? Like this one, Entre Rios y Fronteras, Reframing Joteria Kingship and Futurity, we put a lot of thinking into like these themes, right? And into like, what are the kinds of questions that we're asking when we bring all of these folks together in this space. So those are just a few of the key moments or people in my journey. Like I said, there's a lot more, but I just wanted to share a few, right, with you today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions later. Let's see. All right. So the overall project, right? Because you read one article um, from um, from the research, but there's a much larger project, and I have published different pieces in different places. Like I published a piece on Arena nightclub and sonic memories in the Sounding Out blog, and then I published a piece in the Transgender Studies Quarterly, which is more about fashion and trans Latinas and meaning making of fashion and sequins and the relevance and importance of self making through fashion and clothing. And I talk about Bambi in that piece and other trans Latinas as well. This title here, Mapping Memory, Space, and Aesthetics in Joteria LA, is the tentative title to my book project, as your professor mentioned earlier. So I have been using a mixed method approach, and these are just a few of the methods that I use. Queer oral history, which is a oral history process in which the narrator and researcher are both queer, right? And there's some kind of mutual understanding. And this is something that Horacio Roca Ramirez also wrote about. He and Nana Lamia Boyd have a book about. I also look at archives, and these are not just physical archives, right? Not just documents that you can get it from a box, right? Or newspaper clippings, right? But there are also ephemeral moments, fleeting. The archive is ephemeral, right? It's fleeting. These are sounds, memories, feelings, performances that can't be always be captured inside a box that you put in an archival location, right? But these are archives that are carried in the body, right? Archives that are carried in our histories, right? And so, those are the kinds of archives that I'm engaging with in the project, and I can talk more about that later. The other one is, which I mentioned when I was talking about my own childhood, autohistoria teoria, theorizing my lived experience relationally, right? Not just about me, but how my Jotek's journey connects to the stories of other queer, lesbian, trans folks in LA, right? Based off of Gloria Anzaldua's theories in the flesh. And some of the people and places that I look at in the overall project are nightclubs and bars, and you'll recognize some of these from the article. And if you've read my other stuff, nightclubs and bars and restaurants too, like El Conquistador in Silver Lake, Arena in Hollywood, marches and protests, like the immigrant rights marches, pop culture, Todos Me Miran, Gloria Trevi's song, which is from that song, I actually theorized this idea of sequins, also this sequined world, this mundo de lentejuelas, right? So I drew from Gloria Trevi's um, lyrics to think about. Also, the outfits of Juan Gabriel, the Mexican singer that many of us grew up with, right? And remember, I'm stitching together all of these sequins together, right? Stitching them together, maybe not with string, with glue, but I'm sticking them together, right? Performances, Gloria Trevi performance in Long Beach Pride in 2004, which, Dulce, if you're there, I saw that you joined. I know that you were there also. Quotidian moments, which are everyday moments, right? Because we tend to think that what's important to document history is like these grandiose moments, right? When in reality, like everyday moments are as important as, let's say, the moment that somebody came out, right? Or somebody's wedding, or when somebody had a child, right? Those are like big moments, right? Or we tend to talk about larger structural or systemic things, right? But I'm really interested in what are those everyday moments, right? Like when somebody wrote a little cartita de amor to someone and the meaning of that, right? That little love letter. Or when Bambi Salcedo shared with me in one of our first interviews many years ago, when she said that when she got her first job, her first paycheck in Mexico, she bought roller skates, patines, right? To be able to be free and play, right? As a kid in Mexico. Or Juan Rizuleo, who's another narrator in my project, who shared with me about his altar that he was keeping in the 80s for friends that he had lost to AIDS. And he had an altar of like 50 friends. He had lost like 50 friends to AIDS and was creating this altar all within like a short amount of time. And this is one of those memories that he shared with me, right? And he talked about writing the names and then thinking like, this is so, what did he say? He said this feels so morbid to have to write everyone's names that I'm losing, but it was a reality, right? And I think with the pandemic, you see some of those similarities too, right? Of folks we've lost so many people. And then I also, I talk about ephemeral archives, but also physical archives. I do look at physical archives like institutional archives at UCLA and USC, right? The Cesar Chavez archives at UCLA, also the one the One Archives at USC, which I need to go back to very soon. I look at narrators have shared corporeal marks with me, their scars on their bodies, their tattoos. I also incorporate that into thinking about their stories, right? I talk about my own acne scars that I have from growing up with cystic acne. I look at fashion, so garments, clothing, photos that the narrators share with me as well. So yes, the archives are ephemeral, right? But we also have physical archives, and some of those physical archives are literally people's bodies, right? So this concept, and I have another slide where I talk more, like, I define it in the article, but just to give you a visual here, in my project, I'm bringing together the space, aesthetics, right? And by aesthetics, I mean art, fashion, right? The visual, right? The space, which is, the restaurants, the clubs, the streets, whatever, it could be public space, intimate space, like somebody's home. And then memory, collective memory, the memories that we all share, right? Or individual memories and how those shape us as well. So there's a conversation in my work between individual and collective memory, right? In terms of how people remember their own lives, in relation to, um, you know, history with a capital H, right? Per se. And I have the arrow here because since this article that your professor assigned is about oral history, right? This article in particular deals more with memory, right? Although it does talk about space and some of the other things as well. Okay. So they're, as you can see, like with the diagram, they're interconnected, right? And here we have the fabulous Bambi Salcedo, right? So, and I'll talk a little bit about that image in a second. Sequins in the rubble is the practices, activities, methods, pursuits, and strategies used and involved in navigating, negotiating, overcoming, resisting, and healing from institutional, systemic, physical, environmental, personal, and interpersonal forms of violence and trauma. All right. So on one hand, you have sequins, which are, these strategies of resistance, dancing, performing, telling your story, right? Self-care, self-healing practices, doing this research, right? Those are all the sequins, right? That may or may not involve actual sequence, right? Because it's both literal and metaphorical, right? And then you have the rubble, right? And as I say here, the rubble stems from a lot of different places, right? Institutional, systemic, physical, environmental, personal, and interpersonal forms of violence. And in the book, I'm writing about not only personal, interpersonal, and personal forms of violence that people have experienced, like from the police, domestic violence, right? Violence from family members, but also the earthquakes that have happened in Los Angeles. People have shared their stories in connection to like the 94 earthquake, right? Like and how, oh yeah, like that week of the earthquake, I went to arena to party even though the earthquake happened, so people sort of have shared their stories in the midst of the, the 92 riots that were happening, right? So a lot of the institutional and systemic forms of violence that are going on in the city is part of this framework that I'm talking about as well, right? And so the challenge is always to how do I weave in these sequins in the midst of all this other forms of violence and trauma that people are experiencing? Because at the end of the day, I feel like my project is about that joy and is about those moments of survival and resistance and resilience, right? But without diminishing the trauma and the violence, right? And so this dress, I don't know if, has anyone read my piece in TSQ, just curious, about trans Latinas and stitching together an archive of trans Latinas and fashion. Well, if you haven't, check it out. It's only about 8 to 10 pages. But in that, one of the examples that I use in that article is talking about Bambi Salcedo, this purple dress that she wore to the GLAAD Awards. And I interviewed her about it, and she said that for her it was a big deal, right, to be invited to this event and to be able to put on when trans lives, when trans Latina lives, when the lives of undocumented Latinas are not valued, right, and are dehumanized, to be able to show up and to wear a dress like this and to claim I am here, right? Like yo valgo y yo soy alguien, that's powerful, right? And so for some of us, we may discard fashion as something that is problematic or that's, you know, um, not a worthy cause of study, but there's a whole field of study, fashion studies, right? People are looking at fashion in really critical and important ways in terms of what they tell us about the world, right, and about resistance. And so in that essay, I talk about Bambi and her dress and make connections to other trans Latinas and sort of like do this kind of genealogy, right, of the relevance of sequins in queer Latinx culture, but specifically what they mean or don't mean to trans Latinas, right? Let's see. Is there anything in the chat? I just want to check. No? Are we good?
No, there's some people sharing how they too remember going to arena, and also I believe Ruben said he used to go to parties with his mother of the owner of El Conquistador.
Oh, awesome. Ruben, I got to talk to you. I want to know.
I also included your article for everybody to
Okay.
download.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you. And I see some comments about Horacio. Thank you so much. All right, so I'll move on from this slide. And then specifically about the article that you all read for this class, do folks want to share really quick? What are some, before I go into it, does anyone want to share really quick, like any thoughts about the article? Not questions yet per se, but just what do you think was most important about it? What stood out for you? What are some quotes that resonated? You know, what kind of meaning did you make out of this article? Anybody? Or connections? Anyone? You could put it in the chat too if you want. I just have to look at the chat.
When I was reading it, I found it really amazing how you centered the lives of these lesbians who, like you said, I think you said like that they're not activists, they're not authors, they're not artists. So who's going to tell their stories? So I thought that was really cool because it's an approach that is not very common.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Eddy, was that you, Selena?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw the little box lit. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Selena. Anyone else?
Hi, Eddy. My name is Salvador. I really like the article too because I like that it incorporated other aspects of the women's lives besides like their migration story. So you had a little bit about their love life. You had a little bit also about like them going out and having fun at different bars. And so I really appreciated that. And it just goes to show that we can learn not just from, you know, like sadness, but from joy as well. So thank you for that.
Of course. Thank you, Salvador. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Roberto shared, Roberto Gutierrez Perez. I don't know, Roberto, would you like to share? Or I could read it.
Oh, I see it. The use of sequins in the rubble is an important metaphor for queer life. The image is beautiful, my friend. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto, for being here. Roberto and I have presented together and our trajectories have intersected in many ways, many places along the way. So I'm glad to see you here. Albert says, I appreciated the article shed light on reshaping motherhood. Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of my, I'm in my reflections, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the idea of motherhood and And it's something that I want to write more about in relation to, because I, sin querer queriendo, I interviewed a lot of moms, you know, who are queer, you know, lesbian, bi, right? And so I think we need to tell those stories, or, you know, there's already a lot of great work in Chicanx studies, Latinx studies on motherhood, right? But I think we need to think more critically, right, about motherhood. Excuse me, I gotta, sorry. My weird sneezes, thank you. So yeah, just going back to Selena's and Salvador's comments, like, for me, it was really important when I first decided to take on this project, which is immense in many ways, which is, you know, something else I'll talk about later, was that I don't want to just interview like writers who grew up in LA, or like well-known activists of the Chicano movement, you know, or like, I mean, we need to tell those stories, yes, but I also want to tell the stories of the señora that sells, hot dogs outside of the club. What's their story, right? Like of somebody's cousin, you know, who, you know, we kind of know that something's up with them because we see them at the club every week, but we don't know their whole story, you know. Like, I mean, or just everyday teachers, right? Everyday people, right? That are living their Jota lives and Jotex lives in LA, and basically because of the way that the trajectory of the research goes, like those stories get underappreciated, under-researched, undervalued, right? And so I really wanted, so it's a mix. I have a mix of like folks that are more known, right? Like, you know, like Roland Palencia, who's an Guatemalan activist in LA, and Bambi Salcedo, right? And Monica Palacios, who's a Chicana performer, lesbian performer. I've interviewed her, right? But also other folks who don't necessarily identify as any of those roles or categories, right? And also to Salvador's point too, like I wanted to highlight the spaces that we didn't always think as being like spaces of empowerment, or queer, or even queer spaces, right? Like your grandma's garage, right? Like where you would just go help her like organize, you know, stuff, and yet she would tell you all these stories, and that's part of the shaping of your queer sense of self, right? Which I do have stories like that I've collected, of people telling me when they were kids, there was people in their lives that really shaped them, but it was just like in everyday kind of situations, you know, friends of family, right? Sitting around watching TV, like those stories are important too, right? Those quotidian moments. So I'm gonna move on here.
Eddy,
Yeah.
I wanted to say, is there any way we could do 5 more minutes so we could give 10 minutes for question and answer, and you can interact with the students?
Yeah, let me just get through this, and 5 more minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So I'm just gonna go to some of this stuff you already know, right? Like, because you read the article. I'm trying to get rid of the little chat thing here. Hold on. I am like that professor that can't figure things out. So the key aspects of the article, the 2 narrators, the main themes, and then the Joteria mapping. What am I doing, right? Like this kind of lays out the article. This was more for the folks who haven't read the article maybe, or who aren't part of your class, right? That it might give you some idea, right? And this is a picture of Dulce, you know. I haven't shared a lot of photos of some of the folks that I interviewed because either of their documentation status, right? Even though everyone except one person has said, yes, share my name, share my story, share my picture, no me importa, tell my life, you know, like except for one person. Most people have been but I still have to make choices and in terms of ethical research and not putting their lives, you know, in danger or in precarious situations. So I do have permission to share all of their pictures, but I'm sharing, dulces here, just if you wanted to get a sense of an image of what she looks like. This was from a long time ago, right? But she shared this with me. And these are other narrators that I didn't include in the article, but I have Leti, who is the ex-partner of Luna, right? Who I also interviewed, right? At one point I interviewed them together, and that was a little bit dramatic, but I'll get into that one another time. And then Teresa, who's from Chihuahua, mid-50s, grew up in Burbank, raised Mormon, a mom of 4, and who lived in Chiapas up until recently. And then, yeah, I'm basically kind of done because I was just going to talk about reflections and future directions, but I can talk about those in the Q&A. So that's fine. Is that cool?
That's fine. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much, Eddy. Could I just ask everybody if we could show Eddy some love for that amazing presentation?
Woo! You don't know how hot I am behind here.
Oh yeah, we do.
Oh, qué calor.
Did you close all the windows so the outside noise doesn't come in?
Me?
Yeah, that's why I get hot because I have all my windows closed too.
Oh no, I open the windows, but sometimes I close them because like the kids are playing out in the courtyard of my building.
Well, muchísimas gracias, Eddy. I really appreciate this. We all appreciate it. I've been reading my, the students Antepasantes, and they really connected with this article. And so what I wanted to do is I kind of just wanted to mention that this portion of our Platica is, I would like to invite some of our students. I know that 3 of our students read, 3 classes read your article, which was my class, Dr. Tijerina Revilla's class, Anita's class, and I think Dolores's class read your TSQ article.
Great.
So I just wanted to invite those students who read the article, if they would like to share, share reflections, commentary, or any questions to Dr. Alvarez. And so feel free to ask your question in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and to share your comments and also your reflections or questions to Dr. Alvarez.
And I have the chat open so I can see here. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, I guess I should go first. So you know how you're putting the X?
Albert.
Yeah.
Could you introduce yourself para que te conozca Professor Alvarez?
Oh, hi, I'm Alvarez. I'm part of actually Miss Profe Rafa's class in 4900. I'm a minor in Chicano Latino studies, so
nice to
I
meet
should be
you.
graduating this semester as well.
Awesome.
So yeah. So just I have a quick question. No, I have several questions actually, but I'm just gonna address one. You know how you're putting the X, like Jotex and all that stuff, like Chicanx, Latinx here, and we tend to use that here in the US, right? So I was actually watching a TikTok today about it and how people from Latin America don't appreciate the X because you know how we have feminine and masculine nouns. How do you go about that? And like, I guess my question that intertwines with that is like when I was reading your article about Luna, how after 6 years she was able to identify herself as a lesbian instead of like using the asi. How do you think that intertwines when she went back to Mexico, and how does that reflect in her identity that she created here in the US? Do you think there's going to be some kind of complication there?
Thank you. No, that's a great question. I think it's contextual. I think it's not that she never used lesbian or lesbiana ever. It's just that, she didn't really care either way. Like, as I said, am you okay with, how do you feel about that word? She's like, sí, no me molesta, but then it wasn't part of her everyday, like vocab, right, for herself. But she did use it, more later. So I think in terms of, for her, like, she might be using it now that she lives in Mexico. She might be using it more now because she was, of her time here. She might not be, right? It depends on, the kinds of spaces that she's navigating over there, right? So I think we have to be really attuned to the fact that we are in a US context when we're doing our research, right? And that yes, some of the people that we're writing about are immigrants, migrants from Latin America, but and that it may not translate. And I think that if you're, in terms of I think it's about having those conversations with folks, right? But then if you're doing the writing, whether it's a paper for school or publication or whatever, to just be clear about it, just spell it out. Like, this is what I'm, this is where I'm at with this. This is why I'm using this language this way, so just to be clear about it, right? I can't speak for Luna in terms of how, where she's at now with it, but I can say, I think, to your question, that being among other queer folk here in LA, going to Plaza, right, and like that definitely influenced her self, her knowledge of self as a lesbiana, right, as a queer woman, so hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gracias, Albert. Anybody else?
I wanted to share as well. Oh, I don't know if Jessica wants to go first because she put her hand up.
It's okay, I can go after.
Okay, so mi nombre es Cristina Cortez. I'm an undergrad student. My major is Chicano Studies with a minor in LES and Latin American Studies. And I just wanted to thank you for the article that we read. I connected a lot with it. As Salvador, I think it was mentioned, it's nice to hear like the stories or the connections with the people in your community. I connected with this because I felt like it was voicing my story as well, my personal story. When I was younger and I worked at Universal Studios, my coworkers started taking me to these nightclubs, and they were like gay bars. And I remember like going and feeling so welcomed. And it was just a space where I felt like I could express myself. And it's where I had my first kiss from a woman, where I had my first lover. And it was just nice, I guess, to connect with that community because I was never accepted at home by my parents. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your work. It's great. And I'm going to be sharing it as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm glad that it moved you like that. So gracias. Jessica?
Hi, my name is Jessica Avila. I am a first-year graduate student, and I read your article in Prof. Janita's class. I think similar to Christina, it definitely I could relate a lot to the experiences. I remember I always call myself a baby queer when I used to go clubbing. And a few of the bars that you mentioned, I actually did go to. But something that came up in class and also that I was wondering as I was reading it is if in the interviews there was any discussion of how these spaces may be different for like how people from different genders may experience these spaces. Because I definitely do think there's that side of like feeling welcome, and like that was where I got to explore a lot of my sexuality. But I also remember the other side where a lot of times there was a lot of sexism that I experienced because of gay men, or that I also experienced because I'm a femme presenting, and people just were like, well, you have to like be a specific way and behave a specific way. So there was still policing of my queerness. And I was just wondering if that came up in the interviews.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I mean, I think you speak to something that's really important, that we can't romanticize these spaces either, right? Like, I hope that it doesn't come out even, in my arena piece, where I am sort of celebrating those sounds of the club, and that take us back to that moment, that it's also a complex, complicated, moment. These clubs, there's violence, there's sexism, as you say, right? There's so many, there's substance abuse, there's so many things that would be considered for someone not a sequin, right? I guess, right? And so I think it's important to understand that, to know that up front, but that these spaces are dual. There's a duality to these spaces, right? As you mentioned, and people did talk about not wanting to go to certain clubs because it wasn't welcoming, like, as much to trans people, right? Trans mujeres, right? Or to lesbians, right? And so, yeah, there's definitely that element. And so that's why for me, in terms of that mapping of queer nightlife in LA, it's important to, for me, to map the different spaces and what they meant for different people at different times too, right? Like someone that I interviewed for the Arena piece, she did talk about how she, as a queer femme, felt policed in many places, but then she would go to Arena and she could be as femme, and I'm quoting her, as hoochie, as she wanted to be, and feel like she was okay. That may not be someone else's experience also, right? Like for her, that was her experience. So especially with oral histories, like we have to remember these are like individual histories, how folks experienced it, right? But that doesn't tell the whole picture, right? That's why we have to also, historically fact check, and we have to compare to other histories and other experiences as well. Thank you for sharing the Arena piece, Rafa. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're at 5:44, and I want to just respect your time. But I think we might have time for one question. Is that okay, Eddy?
Yeah, I mean, I can stay a few more. I mean, I don't know what time your class is, but I can stay a few 5-10 more minutes, algo así, como quiera.
Does that work with?
I have a question.
Does that work for folks? We'll stay 5 more minutes. Thumbs up. All right, sounds good. But we do have a couple more questions. Go ahead, Ruben.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not related to the article. It's more related to what you do. It's how does one specialize in queer studies?
That's a good question. Basically, some of us are doing queer studies even without the degrees. We are living queer studies. We're living joteria studies. Not all of the knowledge, especially in joteria studies, comes from a book. From a classroom. It comes from our lived experiences, our relationality, right? Like the activism we do. Pero there are classes, right, that you can take, like the one you're in now, that can is preparing you to have like an angle on queer studies, right, joteria studies. And there are some schools that have degrees in it, right, like women and gender studies departments, right, like some Chicano studies programs are thinking about doing like joteria studies minors, so it really is about having the interest and then jumping in and taking courses, doing your own research, right? So it's a whole trajectory. I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you more in the future if you want to talk about it too. So
absolutely. I'd like to have a conversation about it, because that is something that I'm very interested in, and I'm doing research and all that. And this coming year is going to be free, but we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, please. And I'm going to put my email in here. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to talk to anybody. Y ando por ahí por las redes sociales también. Any other questions? Was there another question? I thought there was another question, maybe. By the way, this is my favorite part of presentations, is just chatting with students. I love it. Like, it's my favorite.
Eddy, I know that we had cut you off at the end of your presentation. Maybe you want to share a little bit about your future work, your future projects?
Yeah. So mostly, I mean, I'm working on the book, right? And I'm working on several articles. I just submitted another article that's based on Arena, on the Arena article, the one that is in the chat, but this one's going to be in a journal, and it's expanding the idea of the sounds of Arena. Like, what are the sounds of Arena that evoke like a community belonging, right? And so I write about the whistles, the foot stomping, and the clapping, and how those three sounds invoke different parts of history of the 90s, of queer joteria histories, right? So how they invoke like corporeality, performance, like all of that. So look out for that. That's coming up. Like I said, I'm working on the book, but I'm also very interested, like many of my colegas, in not just writing articles, but also, like doing the panels, you know, and talking about this work in a digital space. I'm also in conversations to do a museum exhibition in 2022. It's not for sure yet, but it is going to be in LA if it happens, where I will be collecting a lot of these stories and garments and documents and creating some kind of interactive exhibition that will have an online component where you could hear the stories, and then also look at, you know, I hope Bambi will let me borrow that dress. I can put it in the, you know, in the exhibition. But that's one project I have going. I also want to bring together more of the narrators and have platicas with them. Like, I want them to come and be with us and have conversations, you know, and maybe us talk about what was the process of me interviewing them, you know, like, I don't want to be just the one telling their stories. Like, if they're still here, I want them to also tell a little more of their story too. So those are just a couple of future things that I'm working on. And then I have a book. I have a book coming out in summer. It's an edited book that Professor Revilla has an article in there, and some other folks from Joteria, from Ajas. It's a book called Transmovimientos. And it's about space and queer and trans narratives and histories and lives. So that's coming out from Nebraska Press in the summer. So looking forward to that. And then also my creative project that I'm working on. That's always like, I'm a poet at heart, right? So that's why academic writing is hard for me sometimes, you know? But at the end of the day, like, I want to just write poetry. So I'm working on a book, on a manuscript of poems and essays about growing up queer and Chicanx, Cubanex in the Valley. So that's just a little bit about my future projects. So.
Thank you. We have someone in the chat who mentioned they just watched the micro documentary on lesbian Tia. Megan?
They finished one. You made one, Megan?
I made one. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, God, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was, oh my God. She I didn't even have to ask questions. And then I got all emotional during the process, and I was like, but.
Are you going to be sharing that with the world, or is that just for your family?
It's for a history class. If she would let me, I would. I know she's letting me with my professor, but I really like it, even though it's like really short, but
that's awesome.
I totally agree. Like, we don't get represented enough, like the smaller.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we need to do more of that, even if it's not something that we share with the world. Like, telling these stories is really important, and the people that we interview, you know, they want to tell their story, you know, like, you know, they have a lot to share. They have a lot of knowledge, a lot of theories in the flesh to share.
I just wanted to share, Eddy, that Megan was one of our first students in our first inaugural Joteria Studies class at Cal State LA. Awesome. And she's doing amazing work right now. I think she's graduating this year. And are you gonna, did you apply to teaching credential or thinking about grad school? But I'm trying to push her to do PhD because she is a rising scholar.
That's great. Well, Megan, if you want to keep in touch, please, any of you, but for sure, Megan, if you have any questions, please reach out, you know. Yeah, definitely. And speaking of documentaries, there's going to be a documentary coming out in the next couple of years. It's not just about queer nightlife. It's about the party scene in the 80s, 90s. And so I was contacted by the documentary filmmaker to talk about, because I've written about Arena and some of these spaces. And so he's going to be interviewing me to be in that documentary. So with that said, is that when you do this research, like, opportunities come about for you to participate in all kinds of really great projects, you know, and that you don't, there isn't just one way to share the knowledge. You can do documentaries. You can, have like TikTok stories. You know, I know people are using TikTok a lot nowadays, you know. I wish I was more up on it, but like, you know, if there was a way, like, I would love to like kind of like share like different snippets of the oral histories that I've done and tell the stories, you know, that way. But I'm not quite there yet. So, you know.
So much of this of your work also, or what you're talking about, Eddie, about Arena, reminds me of Guadalupe Rosales's work.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. Have you interviewed Guadalupe?
I haven't. I have a whole list of people that I need to connect with and hit up. So, but she's definitely on my list for sure. You know,
and her Instagram page, right? Her Instagram map points. I mean, I don't know if any of you know these Instagram pages, but she literally created an archive on Instagram.
Yeah, and I actually use that archive in my writing. Like I'll reference it. And then in my teaching too, I'll send students to look at that, or I'll use, I'll use one of the images with credit, So, I mean, these are amazing like teaching tools, and I'm always recruiting participants for my project. So if you are queer, trans, non-binary, any of these identities or lived experiences, and are Latinx and would be willing to chat with me in the near future, I would love to talk with you, because I'm not only interviewing folks that are older, right? Because there's some like debate in oral history, like, oh, oral history is to document the lives of older people. But no, like documenting the lives of young people is also really important, because young people have a lot to teach us about, even with their, young lives. So I also interview young people,
Well, thank you so much, Eddie. Everybody, please join me in giving Eddie some love. Give him some claps, some aplausos, some hearts. Thank you so much, Eddie. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us today. And before we leave, before I forget, I would like for us to all take a picture contigo. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll take 2 pictures. I will take one of all of us and then one with you.
Okay.
Okay, so if you would like to be in the picture, please turn on your camera, smile, and we will do this. Okay. So 1, 2, 3. And then I'll do one with just you, Eddie. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Awesome.
Is it okay, or am I?
Oh, it's great.
Okay. Wait. All right. I trust you.
They're all great.
Is it Instagrammable? That's the question.
I don't know what that means. No tengo Instagram.
I'm just kidding.
But I'll send them to you right now.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much. Thank you so much. And thank you about my shirt. Yes. And please do contact me if you have questions, or I would love to participate in my project. So cuídense. Bye.
Students, if you need to talk to me, I'll stay back a few more minutes. It was good to see you, Megan.
Oh, I know I haven't reached out at all this semester, but I've been forgetting to.
No worries. We'll catch up soon.
Oh yeah, I am graduating this semester.
I'm glad to hear that. Derek, Julio, Albert, and Ruben, y'all need to talk to me?
I actually have a question for you. I need to send you something to read, if it's possible. It's not related to the class, but it's something that it would explain my some things. I will send it to you, if in case you read it or not. You just let me know later on. But it's and I see that I wrote today because of where I'm at, basically.
Okay. No, sí, mándamelo.
Okay.
And I'll respond. Okay.
Okay.
Gracias.
Thank you. Bye.
Professor, I just have a question. I just want to confirm, because I have it right here on my calendar, that next week, that's when I'll be facilitating. I know you said you were going to send an email beforehand, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, and you're facilitating.
Together, I think it's me, you, and someone else, Julio.
Okay.
Okay, let me check for y'all right now. Were both of you able to get the book Viva?
Yeah, I have it.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Did y'all get the discount and everything like that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
awesome. Okay, let's see. Let me check. Okay. So I have 4 people presenting. So Michelle, Jennifer, and both of you. And so
Okay.
the book is around, how many pages? Is it 75 pages or 100 pages?
Let me check. The book is 81 pages.
So I would suggest that y'all, okay, what'll happen is that I will send out an email asking y'all to check in with me on Tuesday when we have the open Platica. And so we could begin to talk about the book, right? Some of your initial questions or your questions that you might have about presenting the book. So we'll go over that on Tuesday. But from now to Tuesday, I would suggest y'all email each other. Your emails are on the Google Doc, and arrange, like, you take 20 pages, or you take the other 20 pages, right? Or you could all read the, all the 80 pages, and then you could do it by themes. Either you could do the presentation by themes, or you could do the presentation by page numbers. It's up to you. I'll leave it up to you. But one thing I want to let you know about Viva is that the book is documenting the history of an organization of the 80s and 90s during the AIDS pandemic, right? And so it's rich history. Eddy just mentioned Roland Palacios. I mean, he's the first person you read in that book, because he was foundational to that organization when it started in the early 80s. And it was a organization that supported artists, right? Gay, queer, trans artists at a tough time in the 80s, right? With the AIDS epidemic. And so it really talks about the archive, looking at particular flyers, pictures, and it's an amazing history. And so I'll leave it up to you because I think you'll have a better understanding it when you start reading the book, how you want to present the book. Because you again, like all the presentations, you either can just come to the class and just present questions, or you could present pictures, or you could present, slides. It's really up to you. And I say this because in this particular book, because it's 80 pages, it's rich history, but you can probably like present on pictures, right? Pictures that are being talked about in the book. You could present on particular flyers, particular events, right? Because again, come next week on Thursday, you'll only have 30 minutes to present the book. And that's 80 pages. And there's so much history, right? I literally could have, assigned that book for 2 weeks because there's so much there. Okay, so I'll leave it up to you. So again, tomorrow, look out for an email that I'm going to send to all of you, and then I'll leave it up to you to organize yourselves and how you're going to want to do the presentation. But one thing I do require, if you can join me on Tuesday for the open Platica, so we could just start having that conversation about, like, what did you think about the book?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. Is that helpful, Albert?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So
Have a
y'all
good
have
weekend.
a great
Thank you.
Thursday and have a good weekend.
All right.
Bye. Thank you.
Cuídense.